My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I never imagined that a simple parent-teacher conference would be the moment my carefully constructed world would finally collapse. When Mrs. Henderson, my 7-year-old son Tyler's second-grade teacher, gently closed her classroom door and asked me to sit down, I knew something was terribly wrong. Her voice was soft but firm as she said, "Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask you about some bruises Tyler has been coming to school with. They're appearing regularly, and I'm concerned about their location and frequency. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." I felt my stomach drop as I watched Mrs. Henderson pull out a manila folder from her desk drawer. Inside were photographs, dated and carefully documented, showing the marks she had noticed on Tyler over the past several weeks. Purple finger-shaped bruises on his upper arms, a dark mark on his shoulder blade, scratches on his back that he claimed came from playing too rough. Each image felt like a punch to my chest because I knew exactly where they had come from, and I had been making excuses for them for far too long. My name is Sarah Mitchell, 31 years old, and for the past 3 years I had been living in what I convinced myself was a loving relationship with my boyfriend Marcus Thompson. Tyler's biological father had walked out when he was just 18 months old, leaving me to raise my son alone, while working double shifts as a dental hygienist to make ends meet. When Marcus came into our lives, he seemed like the answer to all my prayers. He was charming, successful in his construction business, and most importantly, he claimed to want to be a father figure to Tyler. At first, Marcus was everything I had hoped for in a partner. He would bring Tyler small gifts, take us out for dinner, and talk about wanting to build a real family together. He moved into our modest 2-bedroom apartment in Riverside, 6 months after we started dating, contributing to the rent and utilities, which gave me the financial breathing room I desperately needed. For the first time since Tyler's father left, I felt like we were going to be okay, like maybe I had finally found someone who would love both of us unconditionally. The changes in Marcus started subtly, so gradually that I convinced myself I was imagining things. It began with comments about Tyler's behavior, little criticisms disguised as helpful observations. "Tyler needs more discipline," he would say after my son had what I considered normal 7-year-old moments of energy or defiance. "Boys need a firm hand, Sarah. You're too soft on him." I told myself Marcus was just trying to help, that maybe he was right about Tyler needing more structure in his life. The first time Marcus grabbed Tyler roughly by the arm, leaving those telltale finger marks, I confronted him immediately. Tyler had been dawdling getting ready for school, something any child his age might do, and Marcus had lost his patience. "I was just trying to get him moving," Marcus explained, his tone apologetic but defensive. "I didn't realize I grabbed him that hard. I'm still learning how to be around kids." His explanation seemed reasonable at the time, and when he promised to be more careful, I believed him. But the incidents didn't stop. They became more frequent and more concerning. Marcus would squeeze Tyler's shoulders too hard when giving him what he called guidance. He would grab Tyler's wrist and twist it when my son didn't respond quickly enough to instructions. When I would point out the marks these interactions left, Marcus always had an explanation. Tyler was clumsy and bruised easily. Boys were supposed to be tough. I was overprotective and needed to let Tyler learn to be a man. The psychological manipulation was even more insidious than the physical control. Marcus had a way of making me question my own perceptions and maternal instincts. When I would express concern about his handling of Tyler, he would turn the conversation back to my shortcomings as a parent. "You've been raising him alone for too long," he would say. "You don't understand what boys need." My father was strict with me, and it made me the man I am today. Marcus came from what he described as a traditional family where fathers were the undisputed heads of household and children obeyed without question. His own father, Robert Thompson, was a retired police officer who ruled his family with an iron fist. Marcus spoke admiringly of his upbringing, describing punishments and discipline that sounded harsh to me but which he insisted had built character. "Kids today are too soft," was one of his favorite sayings. They need to learn respect and consequences. When Marcus's parents came to visit from their home in Springfield, I got to see firsthand where his attitudes came from. Robert Thompson was an imposing man in his late 50s, with graying hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to unquestioned authority. His wife, Patricia, was quiet and deferential, rarely speaking unless directly addressed, and always looking to her husband for approval before expressing any opinion. During their 3-day visit, I watched Robert criticize Tyler's table manners, his posture, even the way he spoke. Patricia would nod along with her husband's observations, occasionally adding her own gentle but pointed suggestions about how Tyler could improve himself. The most disturbing moment came when Tyler accidentally knocked over his glass of milk at dinner. Before I could react, Robert had grabbed Tyler's arm and yanked him from his chair. "Clumsy boys get clumsy consequences," he said firmly, forcing Tyler to clean up the spill while berating him about being more careful. I started to intervene, but Marcus put his hand on my arm and shook his head slightly. "Let my father handle it," he whispered. "Tyler needs to learn." After his parents left, Marcus's behavior toward Tyler became noticeably harsher. It was as if his father's visit had given him permission to be more aggressive in his discipline. The bruises became more frequent, and Tyler began displaying concerning changes in behavior. My normally outgoing, chatty son became quiet and withdrawn. He would flinch when Marcus raised his voice or moved too quickly near him. Most heartbreakingly, he began asking me if I still loved him, as if he somehow believed he was the problem. I found myself walking on eggshells in my own home, constantly trying to prevent situations that might trigger Marcus's anger. I would rush to clean up Tyler's toys before Marcus got home from work. I would hurry Tyler through his bedtime routine to avoid any delays that might irritate my boyfriend. I coached Tyler on how to respond to Marcus's questions and instructions, desperate to prevent any interactions that might result in those painful grabs and squeezes. The isolation was one of the most damaging aspects of the situation. Marcus had gradually convinced me to distance myself from friends and family who might question our relationship dynamic. My best friend Jennifer had made comments early on about Marcus seeming controlling, observations that had angered him greatly. "She's jealous," he told me. "She doesn't want to see you happy because she's miserable in her own life." Slowly I stopped returning Jennifer's calls and declined her invitations to get together. My mother, who lived 2 hours away in Cedar Rapids, had also expressed concerns about Marcus during their few meetings. She felt he was too strict with Tyler, and had mentioned to me that she noticed Tyler seemed nervous around him. Marcus convinced me that my mother was interfering and trying to undermine our relationship. "She's had you and Tyler all to herself," he explained. "She doesn't want to share you with a man who actually cares about your family." Gradually, our visits to my mother became less frequent, and our phone calls grew shorter and more superficial. Marcus had a way of making his control seem like caring. He would say he was protecting Tyler from becoming spoiled or disrespectful. He insisted that his discipline was necessary because Tyler's biological father had abandoned him, leaving the boy without proper male guidance. "I'm the only father figure he has," Marcus would remind me whenever I questioned his methods. "Do you want him to grow up without learning how to be a real man?" The financial dependence was another layer of control that kept me trapped in the situation. Marcus contributed significantly to our household expenses, and without his income, I would struggle to maintain our current living situation. He reminded me of this whenever tensions arose. "I don't have to be here," he would say during arguments. "I could easily find someone who appreciates what I'm trying to do for her family." The threat of abandonment, both financial and emotional, kept me compliant, even when my instincts screamed that something was wrong. Work became my only refuge, the place where I could pretend everything was normal. I had been working at Sunshine Dental Associates for 4 years, and my colleagues had become like a second family to me. Amanda Roberts, the practice owner, was a kind woman in her 40s who had often asked about Tyler and seemed genuinely interested in our well-being. My coworker Lisa Chen had children of her own and would sometimes share parenting stories that made me realize how different my home situation had become. It was Lisa who first noticed changes in my behavior at work. I had become more anxious, jumping at sudden noises, and seeming distracted during routine procedures. When she asked if everything was okay at home, I gave her the same rehearsed responses I had been giving everyone. "Marcus is just helping Tyler learn discipline," I would say. It's an adjustment, but we're working through it. Lisa would nod politely, but I could see the concern in her eyes. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening in late October. Tyler had been struggling with his math homework, and Marcus had volunteered to help him. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard Tyler crying from the living room. By the time I reached them, Marcus had Tyler pressed against the wall, his hand gripping my son's shoulder so tightly that I could see his knuckles were white. Tyler's face was red and streaked with tears as Marcus berated him about not paying attention and being lazy. "Stop it," I said firmly. My maternal instincts finally overriding my fear of confrontation. "You're hurting him." Marcus released Tyler, but turned his anger toward me. "He needs to learn to focus," he snapped. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, Sarah. You're too soft, you're going to raise a weak, useless boy if you keep coddling him." Tyler ran to his room, and I could hear him sobbing through the closed door. That night, after Marcus had gone to bed, I sat in Tyler's room and really looked at my son for the first time in months. His arms showed the familiar pattern of finger-shaped bruises in various stages of healing. There was a scratch on his neck that I hadn't noticed before. Most concerning of all was the way he flinched when I reached out to smooth his hair, as if he had learned to expect pain from the adults in his life. "Mommy," Tyler whispered in the dark room, "I try really hard to be good. Why doesn't Marcus like me?" The question broke my heart and forced me to confront a truth I had been avoiding for months. This wasn't discipline or tough love. This was abuse, and I had been enabling it by making excuses and hoping it would get better on its own. I started paying closer attention to Tyler's behavior and appearance after that night. I noticed that he had begun wearing long-sleeved shirts, even when the weather was warm, instinctively trying to hide the marks on his arms. He would rush through his morning routine, desperate to avoid any interaction with Marcus that might result in criticism or physical handling. Most heartbreakingly, he had stopped coming to me with problems or concerns, as if he had learned that seeking help might make things worse. The school had been sending home notes about changes in Tyler's academic performance and social behavior. His teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had mentioned in previous communications that Tyler seemed distracted in class and was having difficulty concentrating on his work. She had also noted that he was becoming more isolated from his classmates, preferring to sit alone during lunch and recess rather than engaging in the social activities he had previously enjoyed. I had been dismissing these concerns, telling myself that Tyler was just going through an adjustment period with having Marcus in our lives. I made excuses to the school about his behavior changes, explaining that we were working through some family transitions and that things would improve with time. But as the reports continued and Tyler's withdrawal became more pronounced, I could no longer deny that something was seriously wrong. The night before the parent-teacher conference that would change everything, Marcus had been particularly aggressive with Tyler. My son had spilled juice on his homework and had started crying, frustrated with himself for the accident. Marcus's reaction was swift and harsh. He grabbed Tyler by both shoulders and shook him, telling him that crying was for babies and that he needed to learn to control himself. When I tried to intervene, Marcus turned on me with such fury that I actually backed away from him. "This is exactly what's wrong with him," Marcus shouted, his face red with anger.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
"You've made him weak and pathetic. A real boy wouldn't cry over spilled juice." He forced Tyler to sit at the kitchen table and rewrite his entire homework assignment, even though it was nearly Tyler's bedtime. When Tyler's hand began to shake from fatigue and stress, Marcus would grab his wrist and force him to continue writing. I lay awake that entire night, listening to Tyler whimper in his sleep, and finally admitting to myself what I had been denying for months. Marcus wasn't helping Tyler become a better person. He was systematically breaking down my son's spirit and self-confidence. The bruises were just the visible evidence of a much deeper pattern of emotional and psychological abuse that was destroying the happy, confident child Tyler had been before Marcus entered our lives. As I sat in Mrs. Henderson's classroom that afternoon, looking at the photographs of my son's injuries, I felt a mixture of shame, fear, and finally clarity. The teacher's gentle but direct questioning forced me to confront the reality I had been avoiding. Mrs. Mitchell, she said carefully, I need to know if Tyler is safe at home. These bruises are consistent with someone grabbing him forcefully and repeatedly. I'm required by law to report suspected child abuse, but I wanted to talk with you first. The word abuse hung in the air between us like a physical presence. For months, I had been calling it discipline, correction, or tough love. I had told myself that Marcus was just learning how to be around children, that his methods were harsh but well-intentioned. But sitting in that classroom, forced to look at photographic evidence of what was being done to my child, I could no longer hide behind euphemisms and excuses. Mrs. Henderson's documentation was thorough and damning. She had been taking pictures and keeping notes for weeks, following proper protocols for suspected abuse cases. She showed me entries in Tyler's file that detailed changes in his behavior, academic performance, and social interactions. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Tyler was exhibiting classic signs of a child living with abuse, and the physical evidence supported what his behavior had been indicating for months. I've been teaching for 15 years, Mrs. Henderson said gently, and I've unfortunately seen this before. Tyler is a bright, sweet boy who has become fearful and withdrawn. The bruises are concerning, but it's the change in his personality that really worries me. He used to be one of my most engaged students, and now he seems to be just trying to survive each day. As she spoke, memories flooded back of the confident, joyful child Tyler had been before Marcus came into our lives. He used to wake up excited about school, eager to share what he had learned and proud of his accomplishments. He would chatter about his friends and his favorite activities, and he approached new experiences with curiosity and enthusiasm. That child had gradually disappeared, replaced by a quiet, anxious boy who seemed to be constantly bracing himself for criticism or punishment. The teacher's questions became more specific and harder to deflect. She asked about Tyler's home environment, about who lived with us, about any recent changes in our family situation. She inquired about discipline methods and whether Tyler had ever mentioned being afraid of anyone at home. Each question felt like a spotlight illuminating the dark corners of our family life that I had been desperately trying to keep hidden. When Mrs. Henderson asked directly if anyone in our home had been physically aggressive with Tyler, I felt my carefully constructed defenses finally crumble. The truth that I had been denying for months came pouring out in a mixture of tears, guilt, and relief. I told her about Marcus, about his harsh discipline methods, about my own fears and the gradual isolation that had made me feel trapped and hopeless. I kept telling myself it would get better. I admitted through my tears. I thought maybe Tyler just needed to adjust, that Marcus was trying to help but didn't know how to be gentle. I was so afraid of being alone again, of not being able to provide for Tyler financially. I convinced myself that having a father figure, even a harsh one, was better than having no one at all. Mrs. Henderson listened without judgment, occasionally asking clarifying questions but mostly allowing me to finally voice the fears and concerns I had been carrying alone for so long. When I finished speaking, she was quiet for a moment before responding. Mrs. Mitchell, I want you to know that recognizing this situation takes courage. Many parents in your position struggle to see what's happening because they're living in the middle of it. The important thing now is that we make sure Tyler is safe. She explained the process that would follow, the mandatory reporting requirements, and the resources available to help us. She assured me that the school's primary concern was Tyler's well-being and that they would support us through whatever came next. For the first time in months, I felt like I wasn't facing this situation alone. There were people who cared about Tyler's safety and who had the knowledge and resources to help us. As I left the school that afternoon, the photographs Mrs. Henderson had shown me burned in my memory. Each image represented a moment when I had failed to protect my son, when I had chosen to believe Marcus's explanations rather than trust my own maternal instincts. The shame was overwhelming, but underneath it was a growing determination to do whatever it took to ensure Tyler's safety. Driving home, I knew that everything was about to change. The careful balance I had been trying to maintain, the compromises I had been making to keep peace in our household, the excuses I had been crafting to explain away Marcus's behavior, all of it was about to come crashing down. Mrs. Henderson had made it clear that she would be filing a report with Child Protective Services, and that meant our private family situation was about to become a matter of public record and official investigation. The fear was paralyzing. I didn't know how Marcus would react when he learned about the teacher's concerns and the impending investigation. I worried about the financial implications of potentially losing his support, about finding a way to maintain our living situation on my salary alone. Most terrifying of all, I feared that I might lose Tyler if the authorities decided I had failed to protect him adequately. But beneath the fear was something else, something I hadn't felt in months. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't carrying the burden alone. There were people who understood what was happening, who had experience dealing with these situations, and who were committed to helping us find a way forward. Tyler's teacher had seen through the facade I had been desperately trying to maintain, and had the courage to speak up for my son, when I had been too afraid to do so myself. As I pulled into our apartment complex, I could see Marcus's truck already in the parking lot. He was home early from work, which immediately set off warning bells in my mind. Any deviation from routine had the potential to trigger his anger, and I found myself mentally rehearsing explanations for why I might be late getting home from the school conference. The fact that I was already formulating lies and excuses before I even entered my own home was perhaps the clearest indication of how abnormal our family dynamic had become. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering the courage to go inside and face whatever awaited me. The photographs from Mrs. Henderson's file flashed through my mind again, each one a reminder of the choice I now faced. I could continue to enable the abuse by making excuses and hoping for change, or I could finally prioritize Tyler's safety over my own fears and insecurities. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and walked toward the apartment, knowing that this would likely be one of the last normal evenings we would spend as the dysfunctional family unit we had become. Tomorrow, Child Protective Services would begin their investigation, and Marcus would learn that his behavior toward Tyler was no longer a private family matter. Whatever happened next, at least Tyler would know that someone had finally spoken up for him, that his suffering had been witnessed and validated by caring adults who were committed to his protection. The weight of the decision ahead of me was enormous, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. The teacher's intervention had forced me to confront a reality I had been avoiding, and while the path forward was uncertain and frightening, it was a path toward Tyler's safety and healing. As I reached for the apartment door handle, I made a silent promise to my son, and to myself, never again would I choose my own comfort and security over his well-being and safety. The apartment felt different when I walked through the door that evening, as if the very air had changed while I was at the school conference. Marcus was sitting on the couch watching television, but his posture was tense, alert in a way that immediately put me on edge. Tyler was nowhere to be seen, which meant he was likely hiding in his bedroom, a behavior that had become all too common in recent months. "You're late," Marcus said without looking away from the screen. His tone was casual, but I had learned to read the subtle warning signs in his voice. "Tyler said you had some meeting at his school. Everything okay?" The question hung in the air like a trap waiting to be sprung. I had spent the entire drive home rehearsing what I would say, but now, standing in our living room with the weight of Mrs. Henderson's photographs fresh in my memory, every prepared explanation felt like a betrayal of my son. It was just a routine parent-teacher conference, I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. "Nothing major." Marcus finally turned to look at me, his dark eyes searching my face for signs of deception. He had always been skilled at reading people, a trait that had initially seemed charming, but had gradually revealed itself as something more calculating and controlling. "Routine conferences don't usually run this long," he observed. "You look upset about something." I forced myself to meet his gaze, knowing that any sign of evasion would only escalate his suspicion. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned that Tyler has been having some trouble concentrating in class. She thinks he might be going through an adjustment period with all the changes at home." The partial truth felt bitter on my tongue, but it was all I could manage without revealing the real purpose of our conversation. Marcus's expression darkened slightly. "What kind of trouble? Is he being disrespectful? Not following directions?" There was an edge to his questions that made my stomach clench. In his mind, any behavioral issues Tyler might be having were failures of discipline, rather than symptoms of distress. "Nothing like that," I said quickly, desperate to deflect his growing anger. She just said he seems a little withdrawn lately. I told her it's normal for kids to need time to adjust when there are changes in their family structure. The explanation seemed to satisfy Marcus momentarily, but I could see him filing the information away for future reference. He had a way of storing up perceived slights and failures, bringing them back during arguments, as evidence of ongoing problems that required his intervention. Well, maybe it's time Tyler learned that acting out at school has consequences at home, he said finally. I've been too easy on him lately. The casual threat made my blood run cold. The thought of Marcus taking out his frustration on Tyler because of the teacher's concerns filled me with a panic that was hard to conceal. I don't think that's necessary, I said carefully. Mrs. Henderson didn't say he was acting out. She just wanted to keep me informed about how he's doing. Marcus stood up from the couch with a fluid motion that reminded me how much larger and stronger he was than both Tyler and me. Sarah, you're too soft with that boy. Every teacher complaint, every problem at school, it all comes back to the same thing. He needs structure and consequences. Real ones, not the gentle talking to sessions you prefer. I watched him walk toward Tyler's bedroom, and every maternal instinct I possessed screamed at me to stop him, but the fear that had paralyzed me for months still held me frozen in place. Instead of protecting my son, I found myself following behind Marcus, already formulating ways to minimize whatever was about to happen. Tyler was sitting on his bed with a coloring book, trying to appear busy and unobtrusive. The sight of him hunched over his crayons, desperately attempting to be invisible, broke something inside me. This was not how a 7-year-old should have to live, constantly walking on eggshells and trying to avoid attention from the adults who were supposed to care for him. Tyler, Marcus said, his voice carrying the false calm that always preceded his worst moments. Your mother tells me you've been having problems at school. Want to explain what's going on? Tyler looked up with wide, frightened eyes, immediately understanding that he was in trouble for something he didn't fully comprehend. I don't know, he whispered, his small voice barely audible. I try to pay attention in class. Trying isn't good enough, Marcus replied, moving closer to the bed. Your behavior at school reflects on this family. When you embarrass yourself, you embarrass all of us. Do you understand that? Tyler nodded quickly, though I could see the confusion in his expression. He had no idea what specific behavior had caused this confrontation, which made his fear even more heartbreaking. He was being punished for existing, for being a child who couldn't perfectly navigate an adult world that had become increasingly hostile and unpredictable. Marcus reached out and grabbed Tyler's chin, forcing him to maintain eye contact. I want you to understand something very clearly. Your mother and I work hard to provide for you, to give you a good home and opportunities. The least you can do is behave appropriately at school. Can you do that for us? The grip on Tyler's chin was just tight enough to leave marks. I realized with growing horror, Marcus had learned to inflict pain in ways that would look accidental or minor to casual observers, but Tyler's flinch told me exactly how much pressure was being applied. Yes, sir, Tyler managed to say around the grip on his face. Good, Marcus said, finally releasing him. Now, since you've been having trouble paying attention at school, I think you need some practice focusing at home. You're going to sit at the kitchen table and copy pages from the dictionary until bedtime. Every word exactly as it's written. Maybe that will help you remember to concentrate better in class. The punishment was designed to be both tedious and physically uncomfortable, requiring Tyler to maintain perfect focus and handwriting for hours. I wanted to protest, to point out that this was excessive for a child who hadn't actually done anything wrong, but I had learned that questioning Marcus's discipline methods only led to escalated punishments for Tyler. As Tyler gathered his school supplies with shaking hands, I caught his eye for just a moment. The look he gave me was one of pure desperation, a silent plea for protection that I was still too afraid to answer. That look would haunt me for the rest of the evening, as I watched my son struggle through page after page of dictionary copying, his small hand cramping from the repetitive motion, his eyes red with fatigue and unshed tears. Marcus supervised the punishment with satisfaction, occasionally criticizing Tyler's handwriting or demanding that he start over when a letter wasn't formed perfectly. The psychological torture was as damaging as any physical abuse, systematically destroying Tyler's confidence and self-worth under the guise of education and improvement. By the time I finally put Tyler to bed that night, he was exhausted and defeated. As I tucked him in, he whispered, "Mommy, I really do try to be good at school. I don't know what I did wrong." The broken confusion in his voice was unbearable, and I found myself crying in the bathroom afterward, muffling my sobs with a towel so Marcus wouldn't hear. The next morning brought the phone call I had been both dreading and hoping for. While Marcus was at work and Tyler was at school, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Janet Morrison from Child Protective Services, and her voice was professional but kind as she explained that they had received a report regarding Tyler's welfare. "I understand this may be frightening," Janet said, "but I want you to know that our primary goal is ensuring children's safety. I'd like to schedule a time to meet with you and discuss the concerns that have been raised. Would you be available this afternoon for a preliminary interview?" The reality of the situation hit me with full force. This was no longer a private family matter that I could continue to manage and minimize. Official agencies were now involved, people with the authority to remove Tyler from our home if they deemed it necessary. The fear was overwhelming, but underneath it was a small flicker of hope that maybe, finally, someone with real power would be able to help us. I agreed to meet Janet at the CPS office that afternoon, knowing that I would have to call in sick to work again. The lies were becoming harder to maintain, and I could see the concern in my colleagues' eyes when I made excuse after excuse for missed days and distracted behavior. Dr. Roberts had pulled me aside the day before to ask if everything was all right at home, but I had given her the same rehearsed responses I gave everyone else. The CPS office was located in a nondescript building downtown, but walking through those doors felt like crossing a threshold into a new and uncertain chapter of our lives. Janet Morrison was a woman in her 40s with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She led me into a small interview room and offered me coffee before settling into her chair with a thick file folder. "Mrs. Mitchell," she began, "I want to start by saying that I know this is a difficult situation for you. Many parents in your position feel scared and defensive when we become involved, but I want you to understand that we're not here to judge or blame. We're here to assess Tyler's safety and determine what support your family might need." Her gentle approach caught me off guard. I had expected accusations and threats, not compassion and understanding. For the first time in months, I felt like I was talking to someone who genuinely cared about Tyler's well-being, rather than someone looking for ways to criticize my parenting. Janet opened the file and showed me copies of the photographs Mrs. Henderson had taken, along with her detailed reports about Tyler's behavioral changes. Seeing the images again was like a physical blow, forcing me to confront the undeniable evidence of what had been happening to my son. "These bruises are concerning," Janet said matter-of-factly. "They appear to be caused by an adult gripping Tyler's arms with significant force. Can you tell me how these injuries occurred?" The moment of truth had arrived. I could continue the pattern of lies and excuses that had enabled the abuse for months, or I could finally find the courage to speak honestly about what had been happening in our home. Looking at Janet's compassionate but determined expression, I realized that anything less than complete honesty would be a disservice to Tyler and to myself. "My boyfriend Marcus has been disciplining Tyler physically," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "He says it's necessary because Tyler needs a father figure and firm guidance. But it's gotten worse over time, and I've been afraid to speak up because I don't know how to handle the situation on my own." Janet listened without interruption as I poured out the entire story, from Marcus's initial charm to the gradual escalation of control and abuse. She took detailed notes but maintained eye contact, making it clear that she was really hearing what I was saying. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before responding. "Mrs. Mitchell, what you're describing is a classic pattern of domestic abuse that includes child maltreatment. The fact that you're recognizing it and speaking about it now is actually a very positive step. Many parents in your situation remain in denial much longer, which puts their children at greater risk." She explained that they would need to conduct a more thorough investigation, including interviews with Tyler and Marcus, as well as visits to our home. The process would likely take several weeks, during which time Tyler's safety would be their primary concern. If they determined that he was in immediate danger, they had the authority to remove him from the home temporarily. The thought of losing Tyler, even temporarily, filled me with panic. What can I do to make sure he doesn't have to leave? I asked desperately. "I'll do whatever it takes to protect him. I just need to know what steps to take." Janet's expression softened slightly. The fact that you're asking that question tells me a lot about your priorities. Many parents in your situation are more concerned about avoiding consequences for themselves than protecting their children. Your willingness to put Tyler's safety first is encouraging. She outlined several options available to us, including restraining orders, emergency housing assistance, and counseling services. She also explained that if I was willing to take immediate steps to ensure Tyler's safety, such as removing Marcus from our home, it would significantly impact their assessment of the situation. I understand that may seem impossible right now, Janet continued. Leaving an abusive relationship is one of the most difficult things a person can do, especially when there are financial and emotional dependencies involved. But I want you to know that there are resources available to help you through this process. She gave me information about a local domestic violence shelter that provided not only emergency housing but also legal advocacy, counseling services, and assistance with finding permanent housing and employment support. The idea of leaving everything behind and starting over with Tyler was terrifying, but the alternative, continuing to live in a situation where my son was being systematically harmed, was no longer acceptable. As I left the CPS office that afternoon, my mind was reeling with information and possibilities. For the first time in months, I had a clear picture of what needed to happen and access to people who could help me make it happen. The fear was still there, stronger than ever, but it was now accompanied by something I hadn't felt in a long time: determination. I picked Tyler up from school that afternoon and studied his face carefully as he got into the car. He seemed tired and withdrawn, but there were no new visible injuries. When I asked about his day, he gave me the minimal responses that had become his norm, clearly not wanting to risk saying anything that might get him in trouble later. "Tyler," I said gently as we sat in the school parking lot, "I want you to know that you're not in any trouble, and you haven't done anything wrong. Some grown-ups are going to want to talk to you soon about how things are at home, and I want you to tell them the truth about everything, okay?" He looked at me with those wide, serious eyes that seemed far too old for his 7-year-old face. "Am I going to get in trouble if I tell the truth?" he asked quietly. The question broke my heart, because it revealed how completely Marcus had distorted Tyler's understanding of safety and honesty. In a healthy home, telling the truth would be encouraged and protected. In our home, Tyler had learned that honesty often led to punishment and pain. "No, sweetheart," I assured him, taking his small hand in mine. "Telling the truth is always the right thing to do, and no one is going to punish you for being honest. The grown-ups who want to talk to you are there to help make sure you're safe and happy." Tyler nodded solemnly, though I could see the confusion and fear still clouding his expression. He had been living in survival mode for so long that the concept of adults who actually wanted to protect him, rather than control him, was difficult to grasp. That evening, I waited until Marcus was asleep before calling the domestic violence hotline Janet had given me. The woman who answered was named Carol, and her voice was warm and understanding as I explained my situation in whispered tones from the bathroom with the door locked. "You're taking a brave step by calling," Carol told me. "Many women in your situation struggle for years before reaching out for help. The fact that you're prioritizing your son's safety shows incredible strength." She walked me through the process of developing a safety plan, helping me think through practical details, like where Tyler and I could go, what important documents we would need to take with us, and how to leave safely without alerting Marcus to our intentions. The conversation was both empowering and terrifying, making the prospect of escape feel both possible and impossibly difficult. Carol explained that the shelter had space available, and that we could come in at any time, day or night. They would provide not only housing but also legal advocates who could help me navigate the court system, apply for emergency financial assistance, and develop a long-term plan for independence. For the first time since this nightmare began, I could see a concrete path forward that didn't involve continuing to endure Marcus's abuse. The next few days passed in a haze of careful planning and growing anxiety. I quietly gathered important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, medical records, and hid them in my car where Marcus wouldn't find them. I opened a separate bank account and began slowly transferring small amounts of money, knowing that financial independence would be crucial for our long-term safety. Tyler's interview with CPS was scheduled for Friday afternoon at his school, a neutral location where he would feel safer speaking honestly. Janet had explained that they used specially trained interviewers who knew how to talk to children about difficult topics, and that Tyler wouldn't be pressured to say anything he wasn't comfortable sharing. Thursday night, Marcus seemed more agitated than usual. He had received a call from his supervisor about some problems on a job site, and his frustration was looking for an outlet. Tyler was in his room doing homework when Marcus suddenly decided to check on his progress. I followed them anxiously, knowing that Marcus's mood made any interaction with Tyler potentially dangerous. Sure enough, when he saw that Tyler had erased something on his math worksheet, leaving a smudge on the paper, his temper exploded. "This is sloppy, unacceptable work," Marcus declared, grabbing the paper and tearing it in half. "You're going to start over, and this time you're going to do it right the first time." Tyler's lower lip began to tremble, but he knew better than to cry in front of Marcus. Instead, he nodded quietly and reached for a fresh piece of paper. But Marcus wasn't finished. "Before you start over, I think you need a reminder about the importance of doing quality work," he said, reaching for Tyler's arm. The familiar grip, the telltale finger placement, the inevitable bruises that would follow. I watched it all happening again, and felt something inside me snap. "Stop," I said firmly, stepping between them. "That's enough." Marcus's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Excuse me," I said. "Stop," I repeated, my voice stronger now. "He's just a child doing homework. There's no reason to hurt him over a mistake." The confrontation I had been avoiding for months had finally arrived, and there was no going back. Marcus released Tyler's arm, but the fury in his expression made it clear that this defiance would not go unpunished. Tyler scrambled away from both of us, probably sensing that the dynamic in our home was about to change dramatically. "We need to talk," Marcus said, in the deadly calm voice that always preceded his worst outbursts. "Tyler, go to your room and close the door, now." As Tyler fled, I realized that everything was about to come to a head much sooner than I had planned. The CPS investigation, the escape plan, the careful preparations, none of that mattered now. I had finally stood up to Marcus, and there would be immediate consequences for that choice. But looking at Tyler's retreating form, seeing the relief in his posture that someone had finally intervened on his behalf, I knew I had made the right decision. Whatever happened next, my son would know that his mother had finally found the courage to protect him. The silence that followed my defiance felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that the ground beneath my feet was about to give way. Marcus stared at me with an expression I had never seen before, a mixture of shock and rage that made my blood freeze. For months I had been the compliant partner who enabled his control over Tyler, and my sudden rebellion had shattered the dynamic he had worked so carefully to establish. "You're going to regret that," he said quietly, but there was a promise of violence in his tone that made me take an unconscious step backward. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" Before I could respond, he lunged toward me with a speed that caught me completely off guard. His hand connected with my cheek in a slap that sent me stumbling against the wall, my vision blurring from the impact. The physical pain was sharp and immediate, but the shock of finally being on the receiving end of his violence was even more overwhelming. "This is what happens when you forget your place," Marcus snarled, grabbing my wrist and twisting it until I cried out. "I've been patient with your weakness, but I won't tolerate disrespect in my own home." Through the ringing in my ears, I could hear Tyler sobbing in his bedroom, and the sound gave me a clarity that cut through my fear. This was exactly what my son had been enduring for months while I made excuses and looked the other way. The pain I was feeling now was just a fraction of what Tyler had experienced, over and over, while I failed to protect him. "Let go of me," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice, despite the tears streaming down my face. "You need to leave, now." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "I need to leave. This is my home too, Sarah. I pay the bills here. You and your brat would be living in a shelter without me, and don't you forget it." The reference to Tyler as a brat sparked something fierce and protective inside me. His name is Tyler, and he's a 7-year-old child who deserves to feel safe in his own home. Something you've made impossible. The second slap was harder than the first, snapping my head to the side and leaving my ear ringing. But instead of cowering, I found myself thinking about Janet Morrison's words, about the resources available to help us, about the fact that Tyler's interview with CPS was scheduled for the next day. Marcus's violence was no longer happening in secret, no longer something I had to endure alone. Touch me again and I'm calling the police, I said, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone. Marcus grabbed my wrist before I could dial, his grip so tight I could feel my bones grinding together. You really think anyone's going to believe you? A struggling single mother with a history of poor judgment. I'm a respected businessman in this community. Who do you think they'll side with? But even as he spoke, I could see uncertainty flickering in his eyes. The arrival of CPS had changed the equation, and he knew it. This was no longer just my word against his. There were photographs, documented injuries, professional assessments of Tyler's condition. The evidence was mounting against him, and his usual tactics of intimidation and gaslighting were losing their power. The sound of Tyler's bedroom door opening made us both freeze. My son appeared in the hallway, his small face streaked with tears and his eyes wide with terror. "Mommy, are you okay?" he whispered, and the courage it took for him to leave his room and check on me despite his own fear was both heartbreaking and inspiring. "I'm okay, sweetheart," I assured him, though my cheek was throbbing and I could taste blood where I had bitten my tongue. "Go back to your room and lock the door. Everything's going to be all right." Marcus turned his attention to Tyler, and I saw my son instinctively shrink back against the wall. "This is all your fault, you little troublemaker," Marcus said, taking a step toward him. "If you had just learned to behave, none of this would be happening." The sight of Marcus advancing on Tyler broke something fundamental inside me. Without thinking, I stepped between them, my maternal instincts finally overriding the fear that had paralyzed me for so long. "Don't you dare touch him," I said firmly. "You've hurt him enough." Marcus's face darkened with fury. "Move, Sarah, that boy needs to learn that actions have consequences." "No," I said simply, and the word felt like claiming my power back after months of surrender. "You need to pack your things and leave. Tonight." The standoff lasted for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Marcus was clearly calculating his options, weighing the satisfaction of asserting his dominance against the growing risks of the situation. Finally, he stepped back, but his expression remained menacing. "Fine," he said coldly. "I'll leave, but don't think this is over. You have no idea how to survive without me, and when reality hits, you'll come crawling back. And when you do, things are going to be very different around here." As Marcus stormed out to gather his belongings, I knelt down and pulled Tyler into my arms. He was shaking like a leaf, his small body trembling with the aftermath of trauma and terror. "I'm sorry, baby," I whispered into his hair. "I'm so sorry I let this happen for so long." Tyler clung to me with desperate intensity, as if he was afraid I might disappear or change my mind about protecting him. "Is he really leaving?" he asked in a voice so small I could barely hear it. "Yes, sweetheart, he's leaving, and he's not coming back. It's going to be just you and me from now on, okay?" The relief in Tyler's body was immediate and profound. His trembling gradually subsided, and for the first time in months, I felt him truly relax in my arms. The difference was so stark that it hammered home just how much stress and fear he had been carrying every single day. Marcus emerged from our bedroom 20 minutes later with a hastily packed suitcase and a look of cold fury that made my skin crawl. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life," he said as he headed for the door. "Good luck explaining to your son why you chose pride over providing for him." After he left, I immediately called the domestic violence hotline and spoke with Carol again. She praised me for taking action to remove Marcus from the home and walked me through the next steps to ensure our safety. We changed the locks that very night with the help of a locksmith who specialized in emergency domestic violence situations. Tyler's interview with CPS the following day went better than I had dared to hope. Janet Morrison called me afterward to say that Tyler had been remarkably brave and honest about his experiences. The evidence he provided, combined with the documentation they already had, painted a clear picture of systematic abuse that had escalated over time. "Tyler is obviously a resilient child," Janet told me, "but he's also been through significant trauma. The good news is that children his age often recover well when they're placed in safe, supportive environments. The fact that you've removed Marcus from the home is a huge step in the right direction." She recommended several therapists who specialize in childhood trauma and helped me understand what to expect during Tyler's healing process. There would likely be nightmares, behavioral regression, and periods of anxiety as he learned to trust that he was truly safe. But with proper support and consistency, most children recovered fully from these experiences. The legal process moved quickly once all the evidence was compiled. Marcus was charged with child abuse and domestic violence, and a restraining order was issued prohibiting him from coming within 500 feet of Tyler or me. The criminal case would take months to resolve, but the immediate protection gave us the breathing room we needed to begin rebuilding our lives. Financial survival proved challenging, but not impossible. The domestic violence shelter connected me with emergency assistance programs that helped cover our basic expenses, while I adjusted to living on my income alone. Dr. Roberts was incredibly understanding when I finally explained the real reason for my recent absences and performance issues, and she allowed me to adjust my work schedule to accommodate Tyler's therapy appointments. The most remarkable change was in Tyler himself. Within weeks of Marcus's departure, my son began to emerge from the shell he had retreated into during those terrible months. His laughter returned gradually, tentative at first but growing stronger and more frequent, as he began to trust that the violence was truly over. His teacher, Mrs. Henderson, became one of our strongest advocates throughout the process. She worked with Tyler's therapist to create a supportive classroom environment and provided regular updates on his progress. The difference in his academic performance and social interactions was dramatic and swift. "It's like watching a flower bloom," she told me during one of our meetings. "Tyler is rediscovering parts of himself that had been hidden for months. His creativity, his curiosity, his natural joy, it's all coming back." 6 months after that terrifying confrontation in our apartment, Tyler and I had established a new normal that felt like a different life entirely. We had moved to a small house in a quieter neighborhood, using assistance from a transitional housing program to make the fresh start possible. Tyler had his own room again, decorated with dinosaur posters and filled with books and toys that had been donated by various support organizations. Our evenings were peaceful now, filled with homework help, bedtime stories, and conversations about Tyler's day that weren't shadowed by fear of an impending explosion. Tyler had begun asking questions about why Marcus had been so angry all the time and whether it was normal for adults to hurt children. His therapist, Dr. Rebecca Chen, helped me navigate these difficult conversations in age-appropriate ways that validated his experiences while reassuring him about his future safety. The legal resolution came 8 months after Marcus left our home. He pled guilty to the charges in exchange for a reduced sentence that included mandatory anger management and parenting classes, though he would never be allowed unsupervised contact with Tyler again. The court proceedings were difficult, but Tyler's victim impact statement, read by his therapist since he was too young to appear in court, helped ensure that the judge understood the full scope of the damage that had been done. Marcus tried to contact me several times during the legal process, alternating between threats and promises to change. Each time, I followed the protocols I had learned and reported the contact violations to the police. The restraining order was extended indefinitely, and eventually, his attempts at contact stopped entirely. The healing process wasn't linear or simple. Tyler had periodic nightmares and moments of anxiety, especially when we encountered men who reminded him of Marcus. But with consistent therapy and the security of knowing he was truly safe, these episodes became less frequent and less intense over time. For myself, I discovered strengths I hadn't known I possessed. Learning to parent without the constant fear of violence was like rediscovering my own instincts and judgment. I enrolled in evening classes to pursue a degree in social work, inspired by the professionals who had helped us navigate our crisis, and wanting to pay that support forward to other families in similar situations. Tyler thrived in ways that amazed everyone who had known him during the dark period. His teachers reported that he was excelling academically and had formed close friendships with several classmates. His creativity blossomed through art therapy, and his confidence grew as he learned that his thoughts and feelings were valued and respected. 2 years after our ordeal began, Tyler and I were living in our permanent home, a small house we were able to purchase with the help of a first-time homebuyer program designed for domestic violence survivors. Tyler was in 4th grade now, consistently making honor roll and participating in after-school activities that would have been impossible during our time with Marcus. The greatest gift was the restoration of our relationship. Tyler trusted me completely again, coming to me with problems both big and small, secure in the knowledge that I would protect him no matter what. The guilt I carried about failing to act sooner had been addressed through my own therapy, and I had learned to focus on the courage it had taken to finally break free rather than the time it had taken to find that courage. During one of our quiet evening conversations, Tyler asked me if I was happy now. The question surprised me with its maturity and insight. "Yes, sweetheart," I told him honestly, "I'm happier now than I've been in a very long time. Are you happy?" Tyler considered the question seriously before nodding. "I like that our house is peaceful," he said. "I like that we can talk about anything and no one gets angry. I like that you smile a lot now." His words captured perfectly what we had built together in the aftermath of our trauma. We had created a home based on mutual respect, open communication, and genuine love rather than fear and control. The scars from our experience would always be part of our story, but they no longer defined our daily reality. As I tucked Tyler into bed that night, listening to him chatter about his plans for the weekend and his excitement about an upcoming school project, I marveled at the resilience of children and the power of safety to heal even the deepest wounds. Mrs. Henderson's courage in documenting the abuse and speaking up had saved Tyler from years of additional trauma and given us both the chance to reclaim our lives. The journey from victim to survivor had been difficult and frightening, but it had also revealed reserves of strength and determination I hadn't known existed. Most importantly, it had taught Tyler that adults who truly love children will fight to protect them, that his safety and happiness matter, and that he deserves to live free from fear and violence. Our story had become one of hope and healing, proof that even in the darkest circumstances, it's possible to find the courage to choose a different path and build a better future. 5 years had passed since that life-changing conversation with Mrs. Henderson, and Tyler was now 12 years old, standing on the threshold of adolescence with a confidence that sometimes took my breath away. The transformation in both of us had been so complete that our old life felt like something that had happened to different people entirely. Yet the lessons we learned during those dark months continued to shape our choices and strengthen our bond in ways that surprised me daily. Tyler had grown into a thoughtful, articulate young man who possessed an unusual emotional intelligence for his age. His experiences had given him a deep empathy for others who were struggling, and he often surprised his teachers and counselors with his insights about fairness, kindness, and standing up for people who couldn't protect themselves. Dr. Chen, who had continued working with Tyler throughout his elementary years, often remarked that trauma, when properly processed and healed, could sometimes create extraordinary compassion and wisdom in children. The annual check-in appointments with Dr. Chen had become less frequent over the years, eventually transitioning from weekly sessions to monthly, then quarterly, and finally to the yearly visits we maintained now more as a precaution than a necessity. During our most recent appointment, she had officially discharged Tyler from regular therapy, noting that he had developed excellent coping strategies and a healthy understanding of his own emotional needs. Tyler has become one of my greatest success stories. Dr. Chen told me privately after his final session. Not because he escaped his trauma unscathed, but because he learned to integrate that experience into a stronger, more compassionate version of himself. He understands that what happened to him was wrong, but he also knows that it doesn't define his worth or his future possibilities. My own journey had been equally transformative, though perhaps more gradual and less obvious from the outside. Completing my social work degree had taken 4 years of evening and weekend classes, but walking across that stage to receive my diploma with Tyler cheering from the audience was one of the proudest moments of my life. The education had given me not only career advancement opportunities, but also a deeper understanding of the systems and resources that had saved us. I now worked as a family advocate at the same domestic violence shelter that had provided us with our initial support and guidance. The work was emotionally demanding, but incredibly fulfilling, allowing me to help other families navigate the complex process of escaping abuse and rebuilding their lives. Many of the women and children I worked with reminded me of Tyler and myself during our darkest period, and being able to offer them hope, based on our lived experience, felt like the most meaningful way to honor our survival. The financial stability that had once seemed impossible to achieve on my own had gradually become our reality through careful planning, budgeting, and the advancement opportunities that came with my degree. We lived modestly but comfortably in our small house, which Tyler had helped me paint and decorate over the years until it truly felt like our sanctuary. The mortgage would be paid off in 12 more years, a goal that seemed miraculous when I considered where we had started. Tyler's academic achievements continued to exceed everyone's expectations, including my own. He maintained consistent honor roll status and had developed a particular passion for creative writing and social studies. His teachers often commented on the depth and maturity of his essays, particularly when assignments touched on themes of justice, resilience, or social responsibility. His 7th grade English teacher, Miss Rodriguez, had encouraged him to enter a statewide writing contest with a piece he had written about overcoming challenges. The essay Tyler submitted was titled, "When Someone Finally Listens," and reading it for the first time brought tears to my eyes. He had written about the importance of adults who notice when children are in trouble and have the courage to speak up, specifically mentioning Mrs. Henderson as someone who had changed his life by refusing to ignore the signs that something was wrong. The piece was mature beyond his years, but also authentically his own voice, capturing both the pain of his experience and the gratitude he felt for the people who had helped him heal. When Tyler won 2nd place in the state competition, the local newspaper wanted to interview him about his essay. We discussed it carefully, considering both the potential benefits of sharing his story and the importance of protecting his privacy. Tyler ultimately decided he wanted to participate, saying that if his words could help other kids in similar situations, the exposure would be worth it. The interview and accompanying article generated an unexpected response from our community. Several teachers contacted the school to say that Tyler's story had inspired them to be more vigilant about signs of abuse in their students. 2 families reached out through the newspaper to thank Tyler for giving them the courage to seek help for their own situations. Most surprisingly, Mrs. Henderson, who was now retired, called to tell us how proud she was of Tyler and how his essay had reminded her why she had chosen to become a teacher in the first place. "Your story shows that speaking up really can save lives," Mrs. Henderson told Tyler during their phone conversation. "I want you to know that you and your mother taught me as much as I hope I helped you. Watching your family heal and thrive has been one of the greatest rewards of my career." The ripple effects of Tyler's essay extended into our personal lives as well. My mother, who had maintained distance from us during the crisis years, partly due to her own confusion and partly because of my need to limit outside stressors, reached out to repair our relationship. She had read Tyler's essay in the newspaper and finally understood the full scope of what we had endured and overcome. "I didn't know how to help," she admitted during our first real conversation in years. "I could see something was wrong, but I didn't want to interfere if I was misreading the situation." Reading Tyler's words made me realize that sometimes staying silent because you're unsure is worse than risking being wrong by speaking up. My mother's renewed presence in our lives added another layer of support and family connection that enriched both Tyler's and my sense of belonging and security. She became a regular fixture at Tyler's school events and celebrated holidays with us, creating new traditions that honored our small but close-knit family unit. The legal aftermath of our situation had concluded 2 years earlier when Marcus completed his court-mandated programs and probation. There had been no contact between him and us since the restraining order was issued, and according to his probation officer, he had relocated to another state and started a new life. The closure of that chapter felt symbolic of how completely we had moved beyond the trauma that had once defined our daily existence. Tyler occasionally asked questions about Marcus, usually prompted by school assignments about family structures or conversations with friends about their fathers. Dr. Chen had helped me develop age-appropriate ways to discuss the situation that validated Tyler's experiences without burdening him with adult complexities he wasn't ready to understand. As Tyler matured, our conversations became more nuanced and detailed, always guided by his curiosity and emotional readiness. "I'm glad he's not in our life anymore," Tyler told me during one of these discussions. "But I also hope he learned how to be better with other people. What he did was wrong, but I don't want him to keep hurting other kids because no one helped him understand that." Tyler's capacity for forgiveness and hope, even regarding someone who had caused him significant harm, was one of the most remarkable aspects of his character development. He had learned to separate the person from their actions, to wish for healing without accepting responsibility for providing it, and to protect himself while maintaining compassion for others. These were sophisticated emotional skills that many adults struggled to develop, As Tyler entered middle school, new challenges emerged that tested both his resilience and the coping strategies he had developed over the years. The social dynamics of adolescence were complex and sometimes cruel, and Tyler occasionally encountered situations that triggered memories of feeling powerless or afraid. However, the difference now was that he had tools for managing these feelings and trusted adults he could turn to for support. One particularly difficult situation arose when Tyler befriended a classmate named David, who was clearly struggling with problems at home. David would come to school with unexplained injuries, seemed chronically hungry, and often appeared exhausted during classes. Tyler recognized the signs immediately and came to me with his concerns about his friend's welfare. "I think David's dad might be like Marcus was," Tyler told me one evening, his face serious and worried. "He has bruises on his arms, and he flinches when teachers move too fast near him. I want to help him, but I don't know what to do." We talked through Tyler's options, discussing how he could be a supportive friend, while also ensuring that appropriate adults were informed about David's situation. Tyler decided to share his concerns with the school counselor, Mrs. Patterson, who had been trained to recognize signs of abuse and knew how to initiate proper interventions. The situation with David ultimately led to a successful intervention by Child Protective Services, and the boy was placed with relatives who provided a safe and loving home. Tyler's role in recognizing the signs and speaking up potentially saved his friend from years of continued abuse. The experience reinforced for Tyler that his own survival story had equipped him with special insights that could benefit others. "I'm glad I went through what I did," Tyler told me after David's situation was resolved. "Not because it was fun or easy, but because it taught me how to recognize when someone needs help. If I hadn't lived through it myself, I might not have noticed what was happening to David." This mature perspective on his own trauma marked a significant milestone in Tyler's healing journey. He had reached a point where he could see purpose and meaning in his difficult experiences, without minimizing their impact or taking responsibility for what had been done to him. It was exactly the kind of integration and growth that Dr. Chen had hoped for, but never guaranteed would occur. My own professional work continued to be deeply informed by our personal experience, and I had become a sought-after speaker at conferences and training events for social workers, teachers, and other professionals who worked with families in crisis. Sharing our story in these settings felt like an extension of Tyler's essay, a way to honor our healing by helping others recognize and respond to similar situations. During one particularly memorable speaking engagement at a teacher training conference, a young educator approached me afterward with tears in her eyes. "I have a student who reminds me so much of Tyler's story," she said. "I've been unsure about whether to say something because I don't want to be wrong, but your presentation made me realize that being wrong about suspecting abuse is much better than being wrong about ignoring it." These interactions reminded me constantly that our willingness to be open about our experience had impact far beyond our own healing. Every teacher who became more vigilant, every parent who recognized warning signs, every child who felt safer because an adult spoke up, all of these represented the ongoing legacy of our survival and recovery. As Tyler approached his 13th birthday, we began planning a celebration that would mark not just another year of his life, but also the anniversary of our new beginning. 5 years of safety, growth and healing deserved recognition and gratitude. Tyler wanted to invite Mrs. Henderson to the party, along with Dr. Chen, Janet Morrison from CPS, and several other people who had played crucial roles in our journey. "I want to thank everyone who helped us get here," Tyler explained when we discussed the guest list. "And I want them to see how good our life is now because of what they did for us." The party became a beautiful celebration of resilience, community, and the power of caring adults to change children's lives. Mrs. Henderson brought photo albums showing Tyler's progress through elementary school, documenting not just his academic growth, but also the return of his smile and confidence over the years. Janet Morrison shared her perspective on how rare it was to see such complete recovery and transformation in the families she worked with. "You two have become one of my favorite success stories," Janet told the gathered group. "Not because your case was easy or simple, but because you both did the hard work of healing and rebuilding." Tyler, you've grown into exactly the kind of young man the system hopes to help create, strong, compassionate, and wise beyond your years. As I looked around the room that evening, watching Tyler laugh with his friends while the adults who had saved us shared stories and celebrated our progress, I felt a deep sense of completion and gratitude. We had not just survived our ordeal, we had transformed it into a foundation for a life filled with purpose, connection, and joy. The conversation had started with Mrs. Henderson's courage to ask difficult questions about unexplained bruises. It had continued through the bravery of professionals who refused to look the other way when a child was in danger. It had been sustained by Tyler's resilience and my eventual willingness to choose his safety over my own fears. And it had culminated in this moment, a celebration of everything we had built from the ashes of our trauma. Tyler's story had become our story, then our community's story, and eventually a beacon of hope for other families facing similar challenges. The bruises had healed completely, leaving no physical trace of what we had endured. But the strength, wisdom, and compassion we had gained through our journey would last a lifetime, continuing to ripple outward and touch other lives in ways we might never fully know. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.